Hey everyone, it's your guy. Welcome back. Today we are going deep on a story that the mainstream media is either ignoring or spinning the wrong way. The European Union has been picking fights with Chinese companies for years. They keep poking and poking. But now, guess what? The EU is the one drowning in its own mess. It's beautiful to watch. Honestly, let me back up. Once upon a time, the EU played both sides of every global fight. They cashed in on their geographic location. They were sitting right in the middle of everything. And they made an absolute killing, billions and billions of US dollars. Then, after they got fat and happy, they turned around and started writing these nasty, unfair rules, deliberate rules, malicious rules. They started crushing Chinese companies and trampling all over the basic right to do business, fairly fast forward to today. And those hidden tensions between the United States and the European Union, they're not hidden anymore. They've exploded into the open, with multiple shocks hitting all at once. The once mighty EU is now trapped in a development crisis that they can't get out of. And I'm going to say something that might sound harsh, but from where I'm sitting as an American, the EU might really be heading for a full-blown disaster. Today, I'm going to break down the real reasons behind all of this. No corporate media spin. No diplomatic niceties, just the truth. Let me be straight with you from the beginning. Europe has always had a weird, greedy, and completely contradictory relationship with China. Let me put it in plain English. They want everything. They want China's money. They want China's money. They want China's factories. They want access to China's markets. And at the same time, they want to stand on the moral high ground and lecture everybody. We Americans used to look at Europe and think, oh, those noble Europeans, they care about human rights. They care about the rule of law. But lately, more and more Americans are waking up. Europeans are actually more ruthless and more greedy than anybody else on the planet. Take that so-called foreign subsidies regulation, the FSR for short. That is just a fancy name for a bully rule. The EU cooked it up specifically to go after Chinese companies. The ES argument is simple, but it's also dishonest. They say, oh, Chinese companies get unfair subsidies from the Chinese government. That makes Chinese products more competitive, and that's not fair to European products. So they say they need to investigate. Now, hold on a second. Let's think about this like reasonable Americans. Normally, if you accuse somebody of something, you have to bring the proof. That's not complicated. That's basic common sense. Every single person in the world understands this here in the United States. If you file a lawsuit, UG better have evidence. If you're in a court of law, the person making the accusation has to prove it. That's how it works. So if the EU really thinks Chinese companies have unfair subsidies, the first thing they need to do is show the evidence. No evidence? Then you're just talking nonsense. You're making things up. But the EU doesn't play by those rules, no way. Their playbook is completely backwards. What they do is, we suspect you have subsidies, so you have to prove that you don't have subsidies. Oh, and while you're at it, you have to hand over everything. Your entire business, all your secrets, all your data. Spread it all out on the table so we can go through it with a fine-tooth comb. If you refuse, then we hit you with a huge fine, tens of millions of US dollars. And then, using that excuse, they just keep expanding their investigation. They go after every single Chinese industry that is actually strong. They don't go after weak industries. They go after the winners. Think about what they've done. The EU has gone after Chinese high-speed rail. They've gone after Chinese wind power, Chinese solar panels, Chinese security equipment, and now cross-border e-commerce platforms. Do you see the pattern? Whatever sector China is really good at, whatever Chinese companies do better than European companies. That's exactly what the EU investigates. We Americans know something about competition. We also know a protectionist shakedown when we see one. And you know what? People in Taiwan who have been doing manufacturing and semiconductors for decades, they look at this and they say the same thing we do. This is nothing but thuggery. You're stronger than me, then I'll investigate you. That's not fair competition. That's a rigged game. That's a bully beating up the kid who studies harder. But the most outrageous part is still coming. The EU actually demands that Chinese companies hand over secret technical data from inside China. We are talking about all the financial records of specific Chinese companies, all their internal documents, their customer lists, their trade secrets, everything, no holding anything back. And if you don't give it to them, then the EU just declares that you must have unfair subsidies, and they hit you with another huge fine. And then it gets even more insane. Are you ready for this? When Chinese companies refuse to hand over their data, which any sensible company would refuse, the EU just went ahead and raided their offices inside Europe. I'm talking about physical, door-busting, police-style raids like something out of a mob movie. They stormed into the offices of a top Chinese security equipment company in Poland and the Netherlands. They seized phones, they locked down computers, they forced employees to hand over every single piece of information they had. Folks, let's be absolutely clear about what this is. This is not an investigation. This is a home invasion. This is a sovereignty violation from an American perspective. If some foreign power tried to do that to one of our companies, if the EU tried to raid Apple's offices in Ireland or Google's offices in Germany, we would be sending warships, we would be launching criminal investigations, we would be going to the WTO. And you know what? Even people in Taiwan who are not exactly fans of Beijing are saying the same thing. They're saying this is no different from bandits. Europe talks all day about the rule of law. Well, what law says you can kick down doors, grab stuff, and confiscate files just because you have a suspicion? That's not law. That's colonial era thuggery. That's what the old British and French empires used to do when they were looting other countries. It reminds you of that famous old saying, you've heard it before, wind can enter, rain can enter, but the king cannot. The idea is that your home is your castle, even the king can't just walk in. But the EU looks at that saying and laughs. They say, oh, the king won't come in, but we will. We're not the king, we're the EU, and we'll come in and take whatever we want. That is exactly what pushed China over the edge. China finally said, enough is enough. First, China fought back, and they didn't fight back with a strongly worded letter. They fought back with a law in April of this year. China passed a new piece of legislation. They call it the Anti-Long Arm Statute. But let me tell you what it actually does. It's simple, it's aggressive, and it's only 3 sentences long. Sentence number 1, foreign countries cannot interfere in things that happen inside China. Sentence number 2, foreign countries cannot go on cross-border fishing expeditions against Chinese companies. Sentence number 3, if a foreign country tries to assert some kind of jurisdiction that China says is illegal, then no Chinese company and no Chinese citizen is allowed to cooperate with that illegal investigation. No handing over data. No handing over secrets. No helping the foreigners at all. If you do cooperate, you are breaking Chinese law from an American standpoint. This is China telling the European Union, mind your own damn business. Stay out of other people's houses. You've got no right to reach across the world and go after our companies. Who do you think you are? You're not the world's police. You're not the world's judge. Stay in your lane. Then on May 15th, China used that law for the very first time. They issued a direct ban. And I don't mean a suggestion, I mean a command. Every single Chinese company, every Chinese citizen, every Chinese institution, all of them are now forbidden from helping the EU with their investigations. The EU wants data. Remember, the EU wants cooperation. Ignore them. And if the EU dares to issue a fine, China says, you fine US, and we will retaliate immediately, in the same hour, on the same day. Plain and simple, your country has your back. The law has your back. Chinese companies must say no to every unreasonable EU demand. And China made it very, very clear that this is just the beginning. If the EU keeps pushing, China has more weapons in their arsenal, and that counterattack toolbox is so full that they will never run out of options. Let me give you some examples. China can put EU agencies and senior officials on a malicious entities list. What does that mean? It means you can't do business with China. It means China can freeze your assets. It means China can deny you visas. You don't get to come to China anymore. You don't get to make money from China anymore. On top of that, China can go after European companies inside China with exactly the same kind of subsidy investigations. You come after our companies in Europe, we come after your companies in China. Volkswagen, Airbus, BMW, Schneider Electric, not one of them is safe, and China can go even further. They can impose trade restrictions, raise tariffs, put up barriers, lock European luxury goods, European cars, and European wine completely out of the Chinese market. You think French winemakers are happy right now. You think German car executives are sleeping well. They are terrified. Now, from where I sit as an American, this is a real power play. The EU thought they could just push China around little by little, step by step. They thought they could keep taking and taking and China would never fight back. They were wrong. They kicked a steel plate. They thought China was still the same pushover from 20 years ago. Wrong. China now has the power. They have the economic tools. They have the legal framework. They have the political will. You touch one finger, they'll make your whole body hurt. That's the first thing you need to understand. Second, this timing is not a coincidence at all. I want you to really think about this. Why did China choose May 15th to make this move? Why that day? You have to understand what else was happening on that exact day. That was the same day that Trump visited China. That was also the day when the United States and China announced a phase of thaw in their relationship. Now, I know what a lot of you are thinking right now. I know because I think it too. Trump lies all the time. He says one thing on Monday and does the opposite on Tuesday. If you believe what Trump says, I have a bridge in Brooklyn to sell you. We Americans know that better than anybody. He'll call you his best friend today and sell you out tomorrow. People in Taiwan say the same thing. They've been watching Trump for years. They know he flips faster than a short order cook flips pancakes. But here's the key that you cannot miss. The big picture competition between the United States and China is a long-term trend. It is not going away. It doesn't matter who is president. Both sides admit that friction is inevitable. But Trump's visit, it didn't solve everything. Nobody is saying that, but it pulled both countries back from sliding into the abyss. At least for now. Right now, in this moment, there is a phase of easing. And China chose that exact moment to drop the hammer on the EU. That is not random, that is strategic. To really understand why that is such a big deal, you have to rewind the clock, you have to go back and look at the global situation from about 2018. Back then, it was the United States and China going at each other's throats. The US was doing everything it could to contain China, tariffs, technology bans, diplomatic pressure, everything. And China was fighting back. They were breaking out of that encirclement. They were finding new markets. They were building their own supply chains. And the EU. Where was the EU during all of this? They were just sitting on the sidelines. They were watching the show. They were eating popcorn. And they were enjoying all the benefits of the world without lifting a single finger to help anyone but themselves. They were lying flat. They were living the good life. You have to understand this. The United States and China were grinding each other down. They were spending billions. They were sacrificing. And Europe was getting rich off that fight. Why? Because Europe didn't have to worry about security. The United States took care of that. A lot of European countries were spending less than 2% of their GDP on defense. Some were spending even less. And that is exactly why Trump was so angry back then. He kept saying it over and over again at rallies. In press conferences on Twitter, he said Europe is freeloading off the American taxpayer. And you know what? He was right. At the same time, Europe was also getting cheap industrial goods from China. They were getting cheap components. They were getting cheap natural gas and cheap oil from Russia. Russia was practically giving it away. And then after they got all these cheap inputs, Europe turned around and sold their own high-end products to the rest of the world. Luxury cars from Germany, fancy handbags from France, precision machinery from Italy at huge markups. Europe at that time was living like a dream. They were drunk on easy living. Every single day, they stood on the global moral high ground and lectured everybody else. They pointed fingers at China. They pointed fingers at the United States. They pointed fingers at Russia. They played the saint. They played the victim. Meanwhile, the United States and China were in a brutal, bloody competition over the future of technology. The internet, artificial intelligence, semiconductors, we were killing ourselves in that fight. And Europe, they did zero innovation. Zero, they built nothing new. They invented nothing new. But they ended up living better than both the United States and China combined from an American perspective. That is absolutely infuriating. And you know what? Even people in Taiwan who have their own complicated relationship with China look at Europe and say the same thing. How is it fair that Europe does nothing and lives better than everyone else? It's not fair. It was never fair. Well, the United States finally woke up before 2021. The ES GDP was actually larger than America's GDP. Think about that for a second. The European Union, with all of its problems, with all of its bureaucracy, with all of its freeloading, had a bigger economy than the United States of America. The EU is having the time of its life. The US would attack China verbally, and the EU would just mouth along. Fake support. The US would try to contain China economically, and the EU would send a couple of old, rusty ships as a symbolic gesture. That's it. Their whole strategy was to do as little as humanly possible while making as much money as humanly possible. From where I stand as an American, that is not an ally. That is a parasite. That is a tick sucking blood from a dog. So the United States got mad, and I don't mean slightly annoyed, I mean really, genuinely, deeply mad. Why should our junior partner eat steak and drink fine wine while we break our backs? That is completely upside down. You are a servant living better than the master. The United States and China were developing cutting-edge technology. They were fighting over who would control the future of the internet and artificial intelligence. They were grinding each other down into dust. And Europe, which has no real tech innovation, no real defense industry, no real energy independence, just lay flat and enjoyed the fruits of our labor. We Americans hate that kind of freeloading. We hate it more than almost anything. And Europe is exactly that. They are the ultimate freeloaders. The truth is, the United States started signaling that it wanted to deal with the European Union as early as 2016. It just wasn't out in the open yet. The signals were quiet, but the smart ones, the British, they smelled trouble right away. The British have been playing global politics for hundreds of years. They know when the wind is changing, and what did they do? They bailed out of the European Union immediately. Brexit wasn't just about immigration or sovereignty, it was about survival. The British are sharp. They know when to jump off a sinking ship. We Americans respect that in business. In politics, in life, if you see a bad deal coming, you get out. That is exactly what Britain did. But the rest of the European Union, they stayed behind, they stayed on the ship, stupidly, naively, thinking that the United States would always protect them, thinking that the good times would never end. By 2018, the United States had had enough. Trump was the first American leader to say it out loud in public. He said Europe has to pay for its own protection. They have to increase military spending. They have to stop freeloading. And the European Union immediately lost its mind. They all started screaming. They called Trump every name in the book. They refused to pay. They said Trump was destroying the alliance. Back then, Trump didn't have a lot of options. He was dealing with impeachment. He was dealing with a hostile media. He was dealing with chaos in his own administration. And the European Union managed to dodge the bullet for a while. But the United States never forgot, and we never forgave. And then came 2022. Joe Biden was in the White House, and Biden played it cool. He didn't have loud fights with Europe. He smiled. He talked about shared values. He talked about the transatlantic alliance. And then behind the scenes, bam, he went for the kill, the most direct move, pushing the Ukraine war. And that was the knife right into the European Union's gut. I'm not saying the US started the war, but we certainly pushed hard. And once that conflict exploded, the European Union collapsed. Energy prices went through the roof. We're talking 5 times higher, 10 times higher. Capital and industry started fleeing Europe immediately. Companies packed up and moved to the United States, to China, to anywhere but Europe. Then the Federal Reserve raised interest rates, and the European Union was completely cooked. For the last several years, the US GDP has been negative. They are not growing, they are shrinking, they are visibly, obviously, undeniably declining. We Americans can see it on the news every single night. Electricity prices in Europe are insane. Gas prices are insane. Ordinary families are freezing in the winter. They can't afford to heat their homes. Factories are shutting down one after another. Thousands of workers are being laid off. That is what happens when the United States decides to collect its due. That is what happens when you freeload for too long. Europe thought we were their friend. Europe thought the alliance was unbreakable. Wrong. Friends are for selling out. The United States is looking out for number one. And number one is us. Third, the European Union is now facing a real disaster. This is not a prediction. This is happening right now. At this point, the United States has laid all of its cards on the table. We are not hiding anymore. Everyone in the world knows who blew up the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. It is obvious. It was not some random act of nature. It was not Russia bombing its own pipeline. Everyone knows. But the European Union, they don't dare say it out loud. The United States has practically admitted it. And the European Union still says, no, it wasn't you. It was Russia. It must have been Russia. Look at that weakness. That is not strength. That is not dignity. That is a beaten dog whimpering in the corner. The European Union gets hit in the face, and they won't even admit who hit them. Worse than that, they make excuses for the guy holding the bat. That is called Stockholm Syndrome. That is when the victim defends the abuser. It's sick. It's pathetic. Over the last few years, the United States has been putting more and more pressure on the European Union, more tariffs, more demands, more humiliation. And the European Union still thinks they are our allies. They still think we are on the same team. Well, the United States sees right through them. The United States sees a weak, lazy, entitled continent that thinks it can live better than us without doing any of the work. You think you can enjoy the fruits of American protection and Chinese cheap goods and Russian energy and do nothing to earn it. From now on, we are going to take it back your money. Why wouldn't we take it? Your industries, why wouldn't we take them? That is the new American attitude toward Europe. And frankly, it's about time. And now Trump is back and he is completely unhinged. He doesn't care about diplomatic niceties. He doesn't care about hurt feelings. He has publicly humiliated the European Union multiple times. On live television, in front of the whole world. He is demanding protection money. He is saying, pay up or we will not defend you. Then the tariff war started, and the European Union thought they could sit back and watch the United States and China fight like two gladiators in an arena. They thought they could just watch the show and eat their popcorn. But guess what? Trump talks big about China. He says tough things about China, but look at what he actually does. He is punching the European Union in the face. He is kicking them in the gut. And while he is doing that, he is taking another big, juicy bite out of European industry. More factories moving to the US, more investment dollars flowing across the Atlantic. That is the United States' attitude toward the European Union today. I will be honest with you, Trump does a lot of stupid things. He says a lot of stupid things. He is a chaotic, unpredictable, often counterproductive leader. But on this one issue, on the issue of standing up to European freeloading from a pure American interest perspective, this is damn good. In international politics, the ruthless survive, the strong eat the weak get crushed. And the European Union is weak. As for China's rise, that has been a long process. China did not become strong overnight. For a very long time, China kept advising the European Union. They kept pleading with the EU. Really, they said, please stay strategically independent, become a real independent power in the world, don't just be America's sidekick. But now the whole world can see the truth. The European Union is useless. They are a lost cause. They are the definition of a disappointment. The EU does not want to be independent. They do not want to stand on their own 2 feet. They just want to lie flat on the couch, do nothing, eat snacks, and live a comfortable life. But as China's national power keeps growing, as their economy gets bigger, as their technology gets better, as their military gets stronger, the European Union's value keeps dropping. Even China cannot be bothered to suck up to them anymore. Even China has given up. What does the European Union actually have to offer the world? French wine, Italian handbags, German cars that are falling behind in the electric vehicle race. Can you eat wine? Can you fight a war with handbags? Can you compete with American AI chips and Chinese solar panels? No, you cannot. So China finally stood up and said, what everyone has been thinking, you refuse the toast. So now you drink the penalty. You had a chance to be reasonable. You had a chance to play fair. You chose to be bullies. You chose to write unfair rules. You chose to raid offices and steal data. And now your good times are over. The European Union's decline is going to speed up. Disaster is coming. And let's be brutally honest here. The European Union is basically America's servant. They are a vassal. They have no independent foreign policy. They have no independent defense. They have no independent energy. They have nothing without other people's help. And yet, they still strut around on the world stage like they matter, like they are a great power. As an American, I cannot stand that kind of behavior. I cannot stand that level of delusion. No real ability, no real power, no real strength, but you act like you're something special. You got sold out by your supposed ally, and you're still counting the money. You got your pipeline blown up, and you make excuses for the people who did it. That is not a great power. That is a pathetic failure. And here's something else you need to understand. Something that most Americans don't think about. Who in the entire world most wants the United States and China to go to war? Who would benefit the most? I will tell you 2 players. Japan and the European Union, hands down, no contest. If the United States and China started fighting, if we went to war, Japan and the European Union would be laughing in their sleep. They would be dancing in the streets. Why? Because if the United States and China bleed each other dry, Japan and the European Union can sit back, relax, collect the profits, and live the easy life all over again. They can watch us destroy each other while they sell us weapons and rebuild our economies. That is their dream. But if the United States and China actually manage to ease their tensions, even a little bit, the ones who are most worried, most scared, and most disappointed are Japan and the European Union. They wanted that bloody fight. They wanted to freeload off our suffering. But here's the good news. In another 5 years, maybe less, they won't even be worth trying to win over. Their economies will be smaller. Their industries will be weaker. Their populations will be older. They will be forgotten in some corner of the world, completely abandoned by everyone. And that is the real meaning of disaster. Look, all of us, whether you are in the United States or watching from Taiwan or anywhere else in the world, we need to understand how international politics actually works. It is not a movie. It is not a video game. It is not about who has the best speeches or the most moral posturing. The European Union's fate today is a lesson for the entire world. If you do not have real power, if you do not have real industry, if you do not have real defense, if you just try to bully people and write unfair rules and freeload off stronger countries, you are the one who ends up getting crushed. The strong do not protect the weak out of kindness. The strong protect the weak when it serves their interests. And when it stops serving their interests, they drop you. That is what is happening to the European Union right now. And here in the United States, we need to remember that lesson too. We have been carrying freeloaders for way too long. We have been subsidizing Europe's lazy prosperity for decades. The days of that are over. You do not pay your share. You do not carry your weight. Then you do not get protection. You do not get our market. You do not get our technology. The European Union is about to learn that lesson the hard way. And frankly, It is about time. That is it for today. That is the truth. Thanks for watching. If you made it to the end, you are a real one. Hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already. Share this video with anyone who needs to hear it, and I will see you in the next one.